Anthony F. Elmore, president and founder of AOCA. AOCA is the Afro-Asian Original Christian Association. We are the original black Christians. We tell the story of the original Christ who was black and Buddhist. Unknown and untold in this world is the story of the original black Christians. Now, if you want to see a picture of the original black Christians, all you have to do is Google the Black Madonnas. When you look at the Black Madonnas, you will know that you are looking at the original black Christians. In fact, there are over 500 Black Madonnas in the world. And what I want you to do, is I want you to look at the picture of Pope Francis praying to the Black Madonna of Chesquiel, also known as the Lady of Chesquiel. And she is venerated as the Blessed Virgin Mary and housed at the China Gloria Monastery in Poland. Now, my lecture today is titled India, the Birth of Abrahamic Religions, Buddhism, Racism, and White Supremacy. Now, in order to provide you a detailed look at the subject, I also created a website, and the website is titled India, Birth of Abrahamic Religions, Buddhism, White Supremacy.com. Via our website, we provide you with hours and hours and hours of detailed information about the Black Buddha, Buddhism, the original Black Christians, the birth of white supremacy, racism. Now, please note that I am not just another black man who come up with critical race theory. Now, I learned most of the information I got, I learned it from the 17th century British historian Sir Godfrey Higgins and his 1836 book titled The Anaclipsis. It is my reading the Anaclipsis where I learned about not only the Black Buddha, but I learned about the Black Madonnas and the Black history, culture, and the birth of white supremacy and racism. Now, in 1980, I read the book. It's called Malcolm X on Afro-American History. It is my reading the Afrocentric book and listen to Malcolm X talk and teach that the Buddha was a man of African descent. That's how I first learned. You see, I joined a Buddhist sect, or at least I started practicing Buddhism in 1970 as part of my old Japanese Shotokan training. You see, Buddhism was a way of life and karate was a way of life, and we practiced this old Japanese Shotokan Karate, and I practiced a form of Zen Buddhism. Now, in 1974, I joined a Buddhist sect called Nichiren Shoshu, or NSA, Nichiren Shoshu of America /SGI, where we chant the phrase Namo Yoho Renge Kyo, or Nam Yoho Renge Kyo. You would know about this Buddhist sect, and that it's the same type of Buddhism that Tina Turner practiced. In fact, Tina Turner and I both started chanting in 1974. Now, what we want to tell you is this. The Buddhism that I was practicing was called Mahayana Buddhism. Now, Mahayana Buddhism is the time in history where the Buddha was changed from black to white. Mahayana Buddhism is the precursor or one of the beginnings to white supremacy and racism. You see, Buddha changed from black to white, and Mahayana Buddhism marked the birth of white supremacy and racism. Now, what happened was it changed the status of people of color worldwide from equality to inequality. Whereas in India, blacks called Chandala was treated as subhuman, whereas they recognized the greatest, or they practiced the greatest inhumanity against humanity in human history. Now, what is unknown and untold, and most black people do not know about, and that is, most blacks do not know about the Africans of Asia. You see, one thing about the Africans of Asia, you see, most people, as we were taught, that civilization began in Africa around the Nile-Euphrates River. But actually, the Africans of Asia are actually the first who created civilization. In fact, the Africans of Asia, now it's called the Harappan culture. The Harappan culture, or the Indus Valley culture, or the Saraswati River culture, it was twice as large as Egypt and Mesopotamia put together, and it was the highest form of city planning, whereas they had running water and perhaps 1 million people in the urban city. In fact, it took people known as white people 2,000 years to have city planning equal to that of the Indus Valley civilization. Now, so what we see of Africa, we see of Africa after Africa was totally torn apart via white supremacy and racism. We'll get to that. Now, it was the glorious black history in India that was rewritten. Now, it was rewritten at a time called, I want you to know this word, it's called the Shaka era. The Shaka era is the time in India where India was, at least northern India, was conquered by white conquerors. Now, the person who conquered northern India, the group was called the Kushans. Now, the Kushans had a leader by the name of King Kanishka. It was King Kanishka who made the most significant changes in world history than any person of his day. You see, King Kanishka grew up, or at least he controlled a part of northern India at the time. He controlled a part of northern India, and this northern India was called Ganhara. Now, Ganhara was very significant in that Ganhara helped to change or usher in the birth of white supremacy and racism, because it is the time in history where black culture was erased and white supremacy was established, in that they changed the Buddha from black to white. Now, a lot of information is new, and I can show you better than I can tell you. See, King Kanishka was a unique place in history, whereas his empire was located in a place, as I told you, called Ganhara. Now, Ganhara was located on the Silk Road, and it intersected between China, it's a Silk Road to China, and it was Rome, and it was India all combined. Now, when we look at the Ganhara art and culture and history, the way to delineate a Brahmin from a Buddhist was the Buddhists were black and the Brahmins were white. You see, King Kanishka created a new form of Buddhism called Mahayana Buddhism. Now, what I want you to do, I want you to look at the chart I established. You see, King Ajahn who had first started practicing Buddhism, King Ajahn held the first Buddhist council, and this is about 500 BC, right after the Buddha's death. Now, the second Buddhist council was held 200 years after the Buddha's death in modern day Bihar. Now, the third Buddhist council took place under the direction of Ashoka the Great. Now, Ashoka the Great was a Mauryan king who lived in the 3rd century BC. Now, in the 4th century BC, in 29 BC, we had the 4th Buddhist Council. Now, the 4th Buddhist Council was very significant. It was significant is because what they did, they put the writings of Buddhism, they put everything in Buddhism in writing, and they created the largest writing of any religious text ever produced by mankind. In fact, it was called the Pali Canon. You see, the language of India was called Pali. Now, the Pali Canon, if you take the works of Judaism, like the Jewish Torah, you take the Christian Bible, and you take the teachings of Islam, and you put those teachings together, the Pali Canon, or the writings of Buddhism, will be twice as large. Now, it's interesting because in the Pali Canon, in the Pali language, which is the language of the black people, they wrote about the Blamir. The Blamir were Africans in Asia who practiced Buddhism. Now, again, the title of this lecture is called India, Birth of Abrahamic Religions, Buddhism, Racism, White Supremacy Lecture. Now, let me be clear. I learned most of my information from reading the 1836 book titled The Anaclipsis by British historian Godfrey Higgins. This is what I learned about the Brahmins. You see, the Brahmins, or the religion of Brahmanism, they hated the Buddhists. And what there was, or what you would find in India and throughout the world, was a fight between the Brahmins and the Buddhists. So what you will learn today, you will learn that the birth of white supremacy and racism came from the Brahmins. Now, you see, there is no archaeological, anthropological, genetic science, literary science, or the historical person called Abraham. You see, Godfrey Higgins explains in the book, The Anaclipsis, that the word Abraham came from the language, they say a Brahmin. So a Brahmin, who eventually we know as Abraham, is the founders of the Abrahamic religions. So you got the Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Let's get back to the Black Madonna. You see, Godfrey Higgins explained in the book, The Anaclipsis, you see, he writes, quote, "The time has arrived when it becomes proper to enter upon examination of the doctrines of the celebrated Buddha of India, which were the foundations of all the mysticies of the Western nations, as well as those which we have seen of Krishna, and from these two were supplied most of the superstitions which became engrafted into the religion of Jesus Christ. In plain, simple terms, from the Buddhist religion and from the Black Buddha and from the Buddhist sect of the Krishnas, it came the birth of Jesus Christ. That's what it came from. Jesus, see, you have the Black Jesus or the African Jesus, and you have the Roman Jesus. You see, in African American circles, we hear talk that Jesus was black. You see, please look at a picture again of the Black Madonna. You see, this is what Godfrey Higgins writes in the Anaclipses. But all these accounts seems to signs of the Black P. Legacy or the Ionians coming to Italy and bringing the Black God and his mother along with them. And they not only brought the Black God and his mother along with them, they not only brought the Black God and his mother, but they brought his house of Laredo, as I shall show in its proper place. So you would understand, ladies and gentlemen, the Christian religion was originally a black religion, but it was the Brahmins who changed the religion. They changed Jesus from black to white, as they changed Buddha from black to white. We'll give you more evidence as we get into this. You see, what is unknown and untold to black people, that the original people of both Greece and Italy were black people. You see, let me show you the Black Legacy art. Now, also, I want you to look up the Ionians, who were the original Greeks. You see, ladies and gentlemen, what we're not taught is that the original Greeks and the original Romans were black people. See, I want you to look up a group of people. They are called Etruscans. You see, the Roman civilization was built on a people called Etruscans. I want you to look at the Etruscan art, the Etruscan history. What happened is, when the Brahmins got into power, you see, through the religion or the Abrahamic religion, you see, Abraham was the white religion, and what they did was they erased black Buddhist history. So when they erased black Buddhist history, there is no evidence of the black civilizations or the black people who made up or where Rome and Greece comes from, because it was the Brahmins who erased the history, and it was King Kanishka who started. You see? Now, please understand the fight between the Brahmins and the Buddhists. You see, the original Buddhists in India were black people. Now let's get back to the white king Kanishka, who controlled northern India. You see, he controlled and influenced a place that I'll tell you called Ganhara. Let's discuss Ganhara art and culture. You see, from Ganhara emerged the beginnings and the foundation of the Brahmanized Christian religion. You see, the earliest record recorded of the white image of Jesus comes from Ganhara art in the form of a coin created by King Kanishka. On one side of the coin was the Buddha, and the other side of the coin was Jesus. You see, it was Ganhara art that set the foundation of white Christian images. You see, the Christian religion came from Buddhism. The Buddha had 12 disciples, and Jesus had 12 disciples. See, when you look at the Ganhara art and you see the Buddha being bathed, it looks like Christ being bathed, because when you look at the outfits and the dress of the Buddhists, they look just like Christians. Now, this is what King Kanishka did. See, Buddhism was originally black. And what King Kanishka did, and what he did with his Ganhara art, was he changed the Buddhas, or the images of the Buddhas, to look Greek, because he erased the black history and they look like Greek. Now, what is the most significant achievement of King Kanishka? You see, King Kanishka's most significant achievement was the birth of racism and white supremacy. See, from the reign of King Kanishka, who was a Brahmin, who promoted Brahmanism, whereas he was not only one of the founders of Mahayana Buddhism, he, along with a former Brahmin by the name of Ashwagosha, King Kanishka set the stage to destroy Buddhism in India. Now, the way that they achieved to destroy Buddhism in India, you see, in the Shaka era, that's about 78 AD, Shaka means foreigner in Sanskrit. You see, in the Shaka era, what they did was they set up a new culture, they set up a new history, and they introduced to India a new religion, a new language. The language was called Sanskrit. You see, Sanskrit was the language of the Brahmins. Now, the people in India, they were Pali, and they spoke Pascript. Now, what they did was, Panini, the inventor of Sanskrit, took the words of Pali and he created a new language called Sanskrit. And in the Sanskrit language, it was the way they used the language to destroy the history of black people, because Sanskrit is a racist language which erased all Buddhist history, culture, and language. Now, you see, a new religion was born in India thanks to King Kanishka. Now, this new religion was called Hinduism. You see, whereas Hinduism borrowed from the Buddhists, whereas they changed the Buddha from black to white, and they introduced the Buddha into the Hindu pantheon, and they made the Buddha white, but they made the Buddha a lesser god. And so he was in a subordinate position, even though he was in the Hindu religion. You see, in the Hindu religion, they use sanctified racism, or they use sanctified racism to mark the beginning of racism, white supremacy. You see, the beginning of world racism started in India with a system called the caste system. Now, the caste system was, it had the Brahmins on the top, who were the leaders. You had the kings and the rulers, who were second. You had the businessmen, who were third. And you had the Shudras, that is the workers, who was fourth. Now, the fifth tier was where they put most of the Buddhists. They were called the Chandalas, or the outcasts. Now, the outcasts in India, they were made subhuman, and it was the greatest inhumanity against humanity in world history. You see, the religion of Hinduism, or another word for Hinduism is Brahmanism, is that Brahmanism was spread throughout the Western world, and they brought it through religion. They brought this white supremacy through religion. You see, the Hindu religion, whereas the Brahmins were on the top, would go on to spread worldwide. See, Godfrey Higgins noted in the Anaclipsis that the word a Brahmin would later become known as Abraham, whereas they created the Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Now, black people must understand the fact that the Jews, And you must understand this very carefully. The Jews were not a monolithic people. You see, they were not monolithic. You see, I hear some brothers who are Hebrew Israelites, they say, we are the chosen one. We are the first Jews. Yes and no. You see, what is not told about the Jews is that, see, you had a fight between Rama and Persia, and you had the fight between Krishna and Buddha. You see, Krishna and Buddha were black, and Brahma and Persia was white. So you had the Abrahamic religions, which was white. So when they introduced the Abrahamic religions, they got rid of the black Jesus, the black Buddha, the black Krishna. See, all this was erased because it was the Brahmins. You see, a lot of you hear a lot of Hebrew Israelites, people say, well, we are the original Jews. No, you are black Jews, but they had the Abrahamic Jews who practiced Hindu religion, whereas the Hindu religion extricates all black history, culture, and language. In fact, they practice a language called Sanskrit. It was in fact Adolf Hitler who got so enamored and excited about the Sanskrit language. He sent scientists to India, and they came up with the Hindu swastika or the Buddhist swastika. See, the swastika came from the Hindu religion. It came from Brahmanism. And Hitler, who was a racist, adopted the Hindu swastika, or which was once the Buddhist swastika, because they practiced the religion of the Abrahamic religions. You see, the white Jews, they had the caste system. Now the white Jews were Brahmins and the black Jews were Buddhists. So when you go into the Israelites or you go into Israel, yeah, the first people came into Israel, they were black, they were Buddhists, but later on down the road, you had the Abrahamic Jews that come, and they were white, and they controlled the religion. For example, when you look at the story of the Exodus, there is no archaeological, anthropological, genetic science or literary science of the Exodus or anything about Abraham, but these teachings came into Egypt. There's nothing that's true about this that can be proved through science. But Abraham was a Brahmin, and they brought the Brahmin religions from India. You see? Now, anyway, it's time to bring this lecture to a close. The Brahmins, by way of Abraham, erased all black Buddhist history. The father of history, Herodotus, visited both India and Egypt over 200 years after the death of the Buddha. Now, this is what Herodotus says. He says, all the tribes I mentioned, their skin was all the same color, much like the Ethiopians. This is the history of the Greek historian. Now, also, he said, upon his return to Greece, they gathered around and asked, tell us about the land of the blacks called Ethiopia. And Herodotus said, there are two great Ethiopian nations. One is Sin, India, and the other is Egypt. You see, that's from Dorius, the Greek historian, 100 BC. You see, as late as 100 BC, India was black. Now, please note that I told you about King Kanishka and his capital, Ganhara. Now, let me bring Ganhara to a 21st century. What they call Ganhara in the 1st century AD is known today as Kandahar. You know about Kandahar in Afghanistan. You see, Afghanistan and Kandahar borders Pakistan, which before Pakistan was once upon a time India, until they partitioned it off. So it was the Silk Road. It was where all this culture came in, whereas the King Kanishka created a new religion that went through the Silk Path, through China, it went through China, to Korea, to Japan. You see, Buddhism did not come into Asia or China until 1,000 years after the Buddha's death, and it did not come into Japan until 400 more years. So it was 1,400 years before Buddhism came into Japan. Now, one of the things that I want to show you, you see, there's the UNESCO, that's the United Nations Culture and Scientific Organization, and there is the UNESCO temple. It's called Kotodaji Temple in Japan. And when they started Buddhism in Japan, the Buddha, they created the largest Buddhist statue in the world. It's called a cosmic Buddha. When you look at the cosmic Buddha, you will see that it's a black Buddha. Now later on down the road, Mahayana Buddhism came into Japan. Now, I started practicing Buddhism, as I told you, with a sect called the SGI or Nichiren Shoshu of America, and I was practicing Mahayana Buddhism. It was because of my black history, my black culture, my black study that I ran across the book Malcolm X on Afro-American history, and I studied the Anaclipsis. Now, in the writings of Nichiren, he says that neither Hinayana nor Mahayana Buddhism are the correct Buddhism, and that they were correct, that Shakyamuni rejected both of them. He said only the true teachings of Buddhism is the Lotus Sutra, and our chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. In concert with this lecture, I am posting the website titled India, Birth of Abrahamic Religions, Racism, White Supremacy.com. So look forward to my website where you can learn more, but we touched upon the surface. I am Anthony F. Elmore, President and founder of AOCA, that's the Afro-Asian Original Christian Association. Thank you very much.